name is Julie Woodzicka, and I will be talking to you about implicit bias, and then we'll focus more on the legal system and how implicit bias impacts it. All right, well, David already spoke of this, everyone knows this quote by Martin Luther King Jr., that, I have a dream that my 4 little children one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. And this talk is really going to focus on why has that been so difficult to achieve. All right, so the things that I just want to very briefly outline what we're going to be looking at today. First, we're going to talk about automatic processing, just ways that your brain works that makes you take in information in very automatic ways. Next, we're going to talk about stereotype, prejudice, and discrimination, and what a lot of you probably think they're the same thing, but they're really not, so we're going to talk about what those are. Then we'll talk about implicit bias. And then last, Judge Trosch will talk about the impact of implicit bias in the legal system. Okay? Now, what I want to say before I start talking about automatic processing and implicit bias is just because these processes are automatic does not mean that we can't override them. So it doesn't mean that just because our brain does these automatic things that we can't slow it down and say stop and kind of make ourselves better. All right? So that's something that throughout this, especially the first part of the talk, I want you to really kind of keep in the back of your mind. All right? So we're going to start out here with 2 examples of how your brain automatically processes information. All right? Now this first example, I'm going to bring up a YouTube video, and this is a bit of a competition. Okay? What I want you to do here, hopefully this will come up well, is I want you to watch this, and your job is going to be to count how many times the players in white pass the basketball. All right? So it's all about your accuracy. So you need to watch really closely the players in white, okay? How much they pass the basketball. All right? So
test of selective attention. Count how many times the players wearing white pass the basketball. How many passes did you count? The correct answer is 15 passes.
All right, how many of you got that right? Very good. All right, now there's one more question with this here.
But did you see the gorilla?
How many of you saw a gorilla? How many of you did not see a gorilla? Oh, come on now, really, only one? Raise your hand high and proud if you didn't see the gorilla. All right, watch this again. All right, so not only was there a gorilla, but he was a chest-beating gorilla.
This video is from research by Daniel Simon, and Christopher Chabris, and is copyrighted.
Because I don't have a computer screen. I don't have a keyboard.
Try the one that makes it small.
This one right here? No. Small player, right? That should do it where I can just close it. All right, we're back. Okay. So sometimes what your brain does, it selectively attends. Okay, so you were really asked to focus on the players. So you were counting, you thought it was important, it was a competition, you had to count how many players. So there was this very big event happened. A gorilla walked through and beat his chest, but many of you didn't see it. Okay, so sometimes you don't see things that you should see. All right, so you have a selective attention. Now other times, read this first little paragraph. How many of you can make sense of that? You shouldn't be able to, okay? Now read this, okay? You don't have to read the whole thing, but how many of you can read that? All right, so you look at, those aren't real words, right? But we just have the first and the last letter is real for the word, and then there's the right amount, but they're scrambled, okay? I cannot believe I actually understand what I am reading, all right? Now in this example, sometimes our processing causes us not to see things that we should. Other times, how our brain processes, we are able to see things that we shouldn't. This shouldn't make sense to us, but we can fill in the right order of the words, okay? So So when we look at how our brain, and these are just two very simple examples, but our brain processes information very efficiently. And the reason for this is we go through life and we're bombarded. I mean, think about all the stimulation that you see every day, everything that you see. You're bombarded with information every second that you're alive, okay? If you had to actually sit and process every single thing that you saw, every word that you saw, letter by letter, your brain would explode. You would be completely overwhelmed. I mean, if when you saw that water bottle, if you had to think, all right, the shape is kind of contoured, it has liquid in the inside, we quickly are able to process information, all right? So basically our brain can go through this information very quickly. And that automatic processing is very, very useful for us, okay? For example, if this was happening to you, this could be a really bad idea to sit and kind of wonder, there is a large animal approaching me in the water. He has sharp, I believe those are teeth coming at me. I mean, what you want to be able to do is you want to be able to get away from that, okay? So evolutionarily wise, it really makes sense for us to be able to process information quickly and efficiently. So it is really necessary for us to function, all right? And we see patterns all the time. We see the world in patterns. We don't see the world in individual events, okay? We see patterns. And we tend to categorize, all right? The way we see those things, we categorize, fruits and people and animals. And the people part is going to be kind of important for this talk, okay? We categorize people because it's really efficient. It would be hard to go through life and try to take each person and get individuating information about them and figure out things about them. So what we do is we put people into groups, all right? And that's a very natural thing to do. This automatic processing can be very helpful. Right? It's helpful because we save cognitive resources. If you were so busy always processing everything in your environment, you wouldn't have any room to do the more higher ordered thinking that you need to do. All right? And as I mentioned before, there was an evolutionary value in that with our primitive brain, it helped us survive to be able to categorize and get away from people we needed to get closer to people that we wanted to. But it doesn't come without costs, okay? With automatic processing, it can also be unhelpful because sometimes we're accurate. Sometimes when we make a judgment about someone based on their group membership, and that's called stereotyping, we are right, okay? Stereotypes aren't always incorrect. Sometimes they're accurate, all right? But we are often wrong, okay? So often right doesn't mean right all the time. We lose information. So we get some information gain, but there's also a good amount of information lost when we do this processing. That's automatic. All right. So I mentioned a stereotype is simply a generalization about a group of people in which you assign identical characteristics, okay? And they're usually stereotyping, they're usually based on group membership. And what we'll find with stereotyping is that they can be positive or negative. All right, so if you think of the main groups, if you think of racial groups in the United States, African American, we have very positive and very negative. All right, so let me ask you this: what's a negative? Someone tell me, what's a negative stereotype of African Americans? That's surprising. No one just yelled it out, all right? Now, one thing I want to say is because you know the stereotype, that doesn't mean that you're prejudiced, okay? If you didn't know the stereotype, that would be a really big problem, all right? That would mean that you're living kind of devoid of your culture and you're not paying attention, all right? Everyone knows the stereotype, so it's okay to say that you know a negative stereotype of, let's say, black men is criminal, okay? Or lazy. Those are all stereotypes, all right? Now, whether or not you endorse them, that's a whole nother story, okay? But knowing them, knowing the stereotypes, doesn't mean you're prejudiced, all right? It just means that you're alive, all right? Now, they can also be positive, all right? So if we stay with black men, we have athletic, musical. They can also be descriptive or prescriptive. So they can actually describe a group, what the group is supposed to be like, or they can really say what the group should be like. Women should be nurturing. Women should, behave in a certain way. And they can be individual. Individual stereotype is information that's gained from my personal encounters with people of the other group. Or they can be cultural, and those are just really in the fabric. They're woven into the fabric of a society. Okay, so a lot of what we know about, we have stereotypes about groups that we've never met before. Okay, so you might not have ever met a person from a group, but you know about that group. Okay, you know the stereotypes of that group because they're woven into our culture. All right. What we find with stereotyping, too, is that social categories that are highly salient, they kind of become more important and we stereotype more with them. Okay, so things that are highly salient are skin color, you notice that. Things like age, okay, Gender is pretty highly salient, and sometimes it isn't, and that bothers us. I mean, has there ever been a time when you've been like in the grocery store, pushing your cart, and all of a sudden you see somebody and you're not sure if it's a male or female? So you might just take your cart and kind of follow them around until you have this need to be able to put them in a category, because then once you put them in that category, then you can really say something about it. That you can know something about them because you know if they're male or female. All right. So they are salient, and social context can also make a category salient. All right. So if you're the only black person in a group of white people, your race is going to be salient. If you're the only woman in a group of men, you're going to feel that people are going to notice you. So if you think you stand out, it's because you do. Okay, people will notice you based on that category. Our expectancies also influence our stereotypes. All right, there's this great study that was done in the 80s, I believe, and it was basically where they had everybody watch a videotape of this woman who goes through her everyday routine. So she gets up, she makes herself some coffee, then she goes and she reads a book, and then she eats a big juicy hamburger, and she kind of goes through this whole day. And what they do is they then they ask people what they remember of that film. But what the independent variable, the information that they manipulate, is whether before you watch the film you were led to believe she was a waitress or you were led to believe that she was a librarian. Okay? What you remember is totally based on whether you think she's a librarian or if you think she's a waitress. If you thought she was a librarian, you remembered the reading and all the kind of librarian stuff she did. If you thought she was a waitress, you remember the big burger, the kind of going out, the other things that she did. Okay, so expectancies are important. And just as I mentioned before, stereotyping is very different from prejudice and discrimination. Okay, so stereotyping is the thought, all right, is the cognition. It's knowing information about a certain group, all right? Prejudice is the affect or the emotion, all right? It's related to stereotyping for absolutely sure, but it's the evaluation, whether you feel positive or negative. Some social psychologists say it's a social emotion, that it's actually more complex than just positive or negative, but it's really actual social emotions like disgust or contempt or discomfort. But prejudice is the affect, okay? So we have stereotyping are the thoughts, prejudice is the affect, and then discrimination is the behavior. Okay, so the discrimination is the actual behavior, and most of you law folk will know that because that's what you look at more often than not. All right, so there are many effects of stereotyping and prejudice. All right, so these are some subtle effects, although I think you could argue they're not that subtle. There's been lots of studies done and looking at what the stereotyping and prejudice does kind of in a real world. This was a study that was done at Ayers in the 90s, and basically what they did is they had Confederates, so people who were in on the study went around to different car dealerships, and they had a black man, a white woman, and a white man. Okay, they didn't have a black woman. It's been redone since then. But this is a classic study. And they went around with the exact same script to different car dealerships, and they basically saw what the ending price was that they got. All right, so these are, they're trained, so they're doing the same thing. What they find is that women and African Americans got higher price quotes than did white males. All right, something a little more recent, in 2010 in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, where I'm from, blacks are 7 times more likely to be pulled over for traffic offenses than are whites. All right, in North Carolina, where the judge is from, is blacks are 3 times more likely than whites to be arrested after a stop for a seatbelt violation. Okay, those are some big numbers. All right, and some could say, well, maybe there were some reasons why. Perhaps in some cases there were reasons why, but it would not explain these numbers. Okay, this is purely people act on their implicit biases. Okay. There was also this great hiring study by Bertrand and colleagues where they sent identical resumes to all employers, and the only difference on the resumes, okay, so this is a really small manipulation, is that you had white names or you had black names, okay? And then they simply looked at what were the callback rates. And they found about 10% for white-sounding names, 6% for black-sounding names, and overall, looking across the study, whites had a 67% chance, better chance than did people with black names of getting a callback. Okay, so these biases, these stereotypes, have real effects. All right. So far we've been talking about pretty explicit prejudice or explicit stereotyping. So, in contrast to explicit biases, we have these implicit, very automatic biases that operate outside of our awareness. And when we look at implicit beliefs and attitudes, there's a couple of characteristics that they all have. One is that we're unaware of them. All right, you are aware of your explicit biases. You know, you might say, well, yeah, I am kind of prejudiced against people of low SES or people who are overweight, okay? But with these implicit biases, you may really believe, I am not prejudiced against black people. I'm really not, okay? And that is great, and that is the starting point, okay? You are not, so you may not be unaware of the bias that you have. Okay? That's the nature of implicit bias. Also, it is often, or some would argue that it has to be unintentional. Your implicit bias, it's not like you're intending to be biased, or it's unintentional, and it's uncontrollable. And this is, I think, the part that people get scared about, okay? Because there's been lots of studies looking at the automaticity of stereotyping, and it's very automatic, okay? And again, we can override these things, but it happens quickly, all right? There are quick processes that step in, all right? So an implicit bias is a preference for a group based on implicit attitudes and stereotypes, all right? Easy enough. Now, the tricky thing here is how do we measure implicit bias? It's really easy to measure explicit bias, all right? What you do is you give somebody a questionnaire and you ask them questions that will measure their bias, all right? There's lots of good reasons why not even to waste time with measures of explicit bias that you can probably guess. The first being that social desirability issues are huge. People often don't want to admit to others and to themselves that they're biased against a different group, whether it be racial or gender or any group, okay? So, but that's how we measure explicit. We just give people questionnaires. Implicit bias is a little bit tougher because, first of all, people might have attitudes about other social groups that they are unwilling to self-report. Okay, they don't want to tell you, all right? You come into a study, you're there with the experimenter, you know, they tell you they're not going to look at your survey till later, but you don't know if they're peeking and they don't want, you don't want them to think you're a bad person, so you're unwilling. And sometimes, remember, people are often unaware. So often people are just unaware of their bias. So you can't really just report them. Okay, yep, I have this implicit bias. So what we have to do is we have to find measures that are indirect, okay? I'm going to talk about a very specific indirect measure that social psychologists use all the time in a second, but I also want to point out that nonverbal measures are a great way to get at people's implicit bias. I am a certified facts coder, and what that means is I got certified in this coding system where you look at every muscle of your face, and every single muscle of your face has a number. And when that muscle moves, you code it. So like this is a 12, this is an AU10, so their action unit is the AU, and every single thing you can think of. And so what you can do is you can videotape people in studies, and you can look at, you have a Confederate who's black, and the person walks in and they do a quick, you could get this little micro, and that's discussed, okay? So you can look at things like that. That's really time intensive. It's a great way looking nonverbal. You can look at social distance. So if I have a study, and I can have a black person in my study, and I can see how I'll let the participant come in and place their chair wherever they want. Well, then I can measure how far did they place their chair from that black person compared to a white person, okay? So there's all these nonverbal measures, but all of them are kind of labor intensive. So researchers came up with this less labor intensive and kind of nifty procedure called the IAT, okay? It stands for Implicit Association Task, the Implicit Association Task. And right now we're all going to do one together, all right? So normally how you would do this is you would do it on a computer, but we're going to simulate a computer with tapping your left or right knee, okay? So you're going to be going like this, and everyone has to do it. You can't opt out, okay? So everyone's doing this, all right? So what you're going to do is you're going to lightly tap your right or left hand on your leg, and what you're going to see in a minute is you're going to see a circle of words, okay? And those circle of words are either going to be names, and those names are either going to be black names or they're going to be white names, okay? And you're also going to have what are called valence words, so words that are either good, things that remind you of good things, or things that remind you of bad things, all right? So what I'm going to ask you to do, and you'll see in a minute, is you're going to start at the top where the arrow says start, and you're just going to go around and you'll see different names, and you have to categorize. If it's a black name, you'll touch one knee. If it's a white name, you'll touch another. Okay, so we'll get more instructions, all right? And the key is here you have to do it as quickly and accurately as you can. So I'm just asking you to categorize as quickly and accurately as you can, all right? And if you make a mistake, you need to fix it before, okay? So if you put a black name in the white name category, you need to go back and fix that before you go on, okay? So I'm giving you, it's not like a trick, you can study right here. Okay, the black names you can see, here are the black names, here are the white names, all right? And these are all names that have been empirically tested to where people rate them as, yes, those are black names, these are white names. And here are the valence words, okay? So you see bad, all these, when you see them, hatred, terrible, war, awful, they should kind of strike a that's bad. And then the good words, joy, laughter, peace, okay? So, here's part, all right, so this first time, we're going to do this lots of times, all right? And I want you to really concentrate on what you're doing, but you should be able to kind of hear. I mean, tap loud enough that we can hear, okay? We're going to start at the start, and so what's going to come this time, if you see a black name, I want you to tap left. If you see a white name, you're going to tap right, okay? So like if the first two names are black, you go black, black, and the next one's white, okay? So this is going to stay up in case you forget, but so left is black, right is white, all right? So the next click, all the names are going to come up at once. So you can go as fast as you can through it, but everyone needs to do it, okay? On your mark. Remember, left, black, right, white. Go. Okay. So some people are still going. So that was pretty good. All right, you guys, that was well. You guys can tap a little harder. You can make a little bit more noise than that. What you should have noticed, there was some variation. There's something called individual differences. So some people are faster at categorizing than other people, okay? So you did that exactly right. Now this time, we're going to do it with the good and bad words, all right? So this time, if you see a word that's bad, go left. If you see a word that's good, go right, okay? So same thing, left bad, right good. Ready, set, go. Someone got fast over there. All right, so you guys went at a better clip. That's generally easier. There's less processing involved. We see those words all the time. All right, now this is where it gets interesting, okay? So now this time what we're going to do is you are going to start at the top, and if you see a bad or a black word, you're going to go left. If you see a good or a white word, you're going to go right, okay? So bad and black is left, good and white is right, all right? Same thing, so they're just going to come up alternating. On your mark, get set, go. You did pretty good. It was a little bit harder task, right? You now have two categories that you're sorting, all right? Now we're just going to switch so we can get practice doing the other hands. This time you're going to go left for white and you're going to go right for black. So we're going to go back to just black and white names. Left is white, right is black. Okay, ready, go. All right, good. That sounded good. Now this last time we're going to go left for bad or white, okay? And we're going to go right for good or black, okay? Left for bad or white, right for good or black. Ready, go. Wasn't so good. All right? You guys noticed you were a lot slower. It was a lot harder, right? It was a lot harder. Now, this is the implicit association task. It's usually done on a computer, and the computer shows you one item at a time. And what the computer does is it actually measures your reaction time. So this is just a demonstration, but normally you get a very, very precise reaction time in milliseconds, the latency score, how long it takes to make that stereotyping, okay? So the effect is, what's the difference between pairing one combination versus the other? So how long does it take you to categorize when you have white and good and black and bad versus white and bad and black and good? Okay, what's a difference in your response times? Okay, the larger difference indicates a stronger association. All right, it can be in any direction. Now, what we find when we do this kind of research, and it's been done with black and white names, it's been done with faces, black and white faces like this. Okay, so the same thing, but you have faces instead of names. Let's put this all up. So with the names, what you find is that when you have the combination, the green bar is black and good. The yellow is white and good, okay? And the latency, longer time means slower. It takes people longer to pair black plus good than white plus good, okay? And in milliseconds, the difference is 173 in this study, 116, okay? So the same with pictures. Pictures are a little faster. People can process faces faster than they can words, so that's why they're a little bit faster. But there is a very reliable, this has been done with hundreds of thousands of people, okay? So there is a preference for the pairing of white and good over the pairing of black and good, all right? Now, for some of you, I bet what you want to say is, well, did order matter, right? We first did, who wanted to ask me that when I was doing this? A lot of people, right? So, order does matter some ways. So in the left-hand bar you see there for white plus good, and if you get white plus good first and then you get black plus good, okay, you get a big preference for white plus good over black plus good. But if you first have black plus good and then white plus good, you get the same effect. It's a little smaller, okay? But it's not very big, okay? So order matters, but way less than you would expect it to matter, okay? So there is this very consistent finding that people like to pair. They have an implicit bias for white, an implicit positive bias for white. People like white faces better than they do black. Another question you might have, what about for people of color? And the effect exists. Again, it's smaller, but there is a preference for black people. They prefer the white good pairing also. Okay, remember these are cultural. This is stereotyping. Okay, this is how strong is the association. These are things that you grew up with. All right. Now, an important point: stereotyping and implicit bias are normal cognitive processes. We like our group better than other groups. Okay, those are implicit. Those are automatic. Those are normal. All right. However, you can't kind of lull this into saying, well, it's human nature, okay? You know, it is human nature for us to process things quickly and to put people into groups and to, like our group, have an in-group bias. But we are still responsible for controlling that bias, okay? It's our responsibility. Just because it happens quickly doesn't mean we can't override it. There's a lot of great research by Patricia Devine, who's at the University of Wisconsin, and she has written a lot about breaking the prejudice habit, okay? And she said, for the first thing is that people really need to want to be fair and accurate. You need to have the motivation to care enough to really want to kind of get this right, all right? You need to be aware of your biases. This is probably the most important piece, that you need to be aware that even though you may think that you don't hold any biases, that you probably do, okay? We all as humans have biases. So you need to be aware of those biases. And you need to work on overriding those automatically activated stereotypic processes. And you might say, well, how? How do I do it? It's really pretty simple. What you do is when you come across, so again, you have to be highly motivated, but if you come across a situation where you find yourself stereotyping someone of a different gender, someone of a different racial group, you need to stop, okay? It's like breaking a habit. You need to say stop. You need to think about what you're thinking, okay? You don't even need to think about why. You just need to catch it. And then you need to replace it. You need to replace it with thoughts of, you know, this person, why would I be afraid of this person? You got to just really work to replace your negative thoughts with positive ones, okay? It's not easy. Trish Devine likens it to like breaking any other habit, like biting your nails or anything. You really got to be on guard and you got to work on it for a long time, okay? So again, just to summarize, processing is automatic. Our brain takes in all this information and processes it very automatically and very quickly. We do it with people as much as we do it with any other thing. But just because it's automatic and we do it all the time doesn't mean that you shouldn't be working on overriding those processes. Because you can. It's hard work, but you can do it. All right. So next, Judge Trosch.
So I want to thank everyone at Washington Lee, David, for putting all this together, but then Professor Brock and everybody else who's been involved, you know, both in, I think it's about time that the law school here at Washington and Lee closed down on Martin Luther King Day. maybe you'll set an example for the undergraduate school. It's hard for me to believe. I went to undergraduate school at Washington and Lee, and it's a little disappointing to me that the undergrad still has classes today. So maybe you'll set an example for the undergraduate program as well, because this school especially ought to recognize the Martin Luther King Day, given the history of this school. Very positive history, but also some connotations that you all know, given the name of the school that you all attend that I graduated from. But I do want to thank you all for being here today. It's kind of interesting that on Martin Luther King Day, and we're talking about bias, only maybe at W&L will you have two white presenters present to you about implicit bias, because I am a white guy. Just so if you didn't stereotypically figure that. I grew up in Charlotte, North Carolina. I graduated from Washington and Lee in 1988. It was a great experience here at Washington and Lee. Both of my parents are lawyers. I went to public schools in Charlotte, but my experience in public schools was like a lot of white students. I was tracked. You all know what tracking is. I remember what tracking is. So most of the kids in my classes look like me. Most of the kids in the advanced classes, for example, look like me. In other classes, most of the kids look like my African American or Hispanic classmates. So we were with each other, but mainly at lunch or when we played sports or in other activities. I tell you all this because I think it's important in my journey from that background, that very upper middle class white background, to where I am today, is really illustrative about some of the things that Professor Woodzicka was talking about once you're aware of implicit bias, not just implicit but explicit bias as well, and how that impacts your life. It really can change both the way you view the world and the way that you live in the world. So I tell you that to begin with because I think it's important to understand where I'm coming from when I talk to you today about this thing that we're calling today implicit bias and how it impacts disparities that people of color, especially African Americans in our culture, in our court system, that you all are going to be entering in one way or the other, the legal system, and how it's impacted people of color over the years in very disproportionate ways. The story that I'm going to tell you, this journey that I'm going to talk about, is really one in three parts. Now, you're law students. I'm not going to cite a single case name. I'm going to talk about a case that I was involved in, but I don't even tell you the name of it. I don't care about names of cases today or citing them out of a book, so that's not really important. I could if you want, but I don't want you to fall asleep, so I'm not going to do it. But I am going to talk about, first, the what, a little bit more in the implicit bias and how it impacts the legal system, the why, sort of my aha moment as to why this was happening, and then finally the how do you do something about it within the legal framework. Because I'm going to talk very specifically, because you all, for the most part, are law students, about how it impacts the court system that you all, many of you all, if you're litigators, will enter into. I will say this, implicit bias, and I think Julie got into this pretty clearly, does not always have to do with race. If you go on, I would strongly encourage you to go on Google implicit association test, and what will come up is a website that you can go to and take the actual computer test. And what you'll see is there are a number of tests about gender, about weight, about age, about race, about background, about socioeconomic class. They've got, I think, 12 tests now.
Oh, they've got
They're more now? Yeah. So and you can take as many as you want, but these associations that Julie had you do with tapping your leg will also apply with regard to women in the workforce, with regard to what you think about people that are overweight, with what you think, whether you would prefer to hire an old person versus a young person, and the associations that you make, and that everybody always says, well, there must be something wrong with the test. This test is wrong because I don't think that way. Everybody always says that and thinks that. So if you thought that, you're with most people. Everywhere I've gone, when we've done that example, people have been, in fact, I just got back from Memphis, Tennessee, Memphis, Tennessee, things got so bad with some of the things that I'm going to talk to you about, that the Department of Justice, in an unprecedented act, filed a complaint against Memphis, Tennessee's juvenile court system for the incredible due process violations that the juveniles that were charged with criminal offenses or delinquent offenses faced when they went to their court system, and the incredible disparities for children of color, mainly African American young men, in their court system. And to avoid a situation where the federal courts could potentially, a lawsuit could end up ending in a court order or the court control of the court system, Memphis, Tennessee's juvenile court agreed to they signed a memorandum of agreement with the Federal Department of Justice in order to avoid further litigation from the Department of Justice. Part of that was they agreed to go to the whole court system agreed to go through 2 days of implicit bias and other forms of training. And so I was part of a team that went there, and they all had to take that test. And so the first half an hour we had to answer questions about why the test was fair, why it was exemplified, or it was an example of, and there were many other tests that were very similar to that test. So you're not alone if you felt that. But I want to go back to this point. It's not always about race, and so I don't want you to think it's a black and white thing, everything's a black and white thing. It is a people thing. It is an in-group and out-group function that we have, again, as human beings we create. The problem with that is that those classifications become stereotypes, which then become biases, which then become prejudices, which then result in the history that led to Martin Luther King Day. And so that's why it's important to talk about. But if you all met me, or you see me, I don't know if you can tell where you're at, I'm pretty tall. I'm like 6'6". And if I met any one of you all and talked to you all at a party or afterwards for more than 2 minutes, you all would ask me, you would make certain assumptions and ask me, I guarantee, I promise you, you would ask if I played basketball. I swear that you would. Professor Casey, stand up. Come here for a second, Professor. Come here for a second. Come on. Come here, Professor Casey. So this is Professor Casey. He's an undergraduate professor. You may not know him. You would not ask him necessarily the same question that you asked me. Sit down, Professor. You wouldn't ask him the same question because he's not 6'6". However, interestingly, both Professor Casey and myself played basketball at Washington and Lee on the same team, correct? He was better. He thinks he was better. He probably was better than me. But we both played here at Washington and Lee. But you would make an assumption, not because so it has nothing to do with race, right? I'm tall, so I must, in our society, I must be a basketball player. Now, it can have to do with race, because you also would make certain assumptions about how I play basketball based on my skin color. That's why you're all laughing. And if I came out to guard you on the wing, if you caught the ball on the wing, and you're a basketball player, somebody's a basketball player, tell me what you're going to do. Casey knows, take me to the hole. Take that white boy to the hole. I heard that my entire life playing basketball, because the assumption is I can set really good screens, I probably got a decent outside shot, I pass the ball well, but I'm not going to go to the hole, and I'm probably not going to be able to stop you from going to the hole. So implicit biases can have to do with race, or they cannot have to do with race. Now, in addition, it was something that Professor Woodzicka said, and I'm just going to say Julie, if that's okay. That's great. Because I'm going to trip up all over Woodzicka. That's all. I'll trip over that. So I'm going to say Julie. But one of the things that she said is the person that has the biases, doesn't matter if you're white or black, you still have the biases. And you can have, so if you're a white person that catches the ball, and I come running out to guard you, you're going to have the same idea. Oh, this guy's probably slower, I can get around him. Right, Jim? You have that all the time when you play basketball. And you're not thinking about it when you play basketball. All you're thinking of is, should I pass off, should I shoot, or should I go to the hole? And so implicit bias impacts even down to playing basketball. It impacts everything that you do. I'll say one other thing before I get into my journey, and that's this. Implicit bias falls under, and Julie can tell us better if I'm wrong about this, because I'm not a psychologist, I'm a lawyer, but my understanding is it's one of these automatic processing things that the brain does, this categorization. They're called heuristics, or shortcuts that the brain takes. Heuristics. Look it up, it's a really cool word. Your law students, if you don't get a single thing about bias or disproportionality or disparity out of this, I hope that you do. But if you don't, you still should learn something today that if you're a lawyer, you can use. Heuristics are mental shortcuts that the brain takes. They don't all have to do with stereotyping. I'll give you an example. If I divided this room in half, and I told this half of the room, the Mississippi River is not exactly 500 miles long. It's longer or shorter than that. How long is it? And I gave you a piece of paper and asked you to write it down. And simultaneously I asked this half of the room the same question, except for I said the Mississippi River is not exactly 2,000 miles long. It's longer or shorter than that. How long is it? And I've been in a room where they've done this and they've tested this over and over and over again. This half of the room would anchor, it's called anchoring. It's a whole different heuristic that we're not going to talk a lot about. But this half of the room would anchor their number on what? 500. So your numbers would, most of them would be somewhere around 500 miles. Because nobody knows how long the Mississippi River is. If you do, you're a weirdo, I don't want to hear about it. This side of the room, your answers would be anchored to around 2,000 miles. Okay? Now they've done that testing with Social Security numbers, things that have nothing to do with the numbers. They have people write down their Social Security number and some other things when they come in to take a test. And then 15 minutes later, as part of the experiment, they're asked to value something. And people actually use their Social Security number, which has unconsciously, not knowing they're doing it, as a basis for their estimation of what something is valued at. Now, why am I telling you all this? If you're a lawyer, you daggum well better know that. Because you can use that information someday, right? When you're in front of a jury, or you're in negotiations, or you're trying to get somebody to value something. So this field of heuristics is something really, honestly, that the law school ought to teach. I don't think any law school around teaches this kind of stuff, but it would be very valuable. It's very valuable information to litigators. Incredibly valuable. Think about it. You want the jury at the end of a case to come up with a certain value. All you do at the beginning of the case and throughout the case is imprint a number in their head they don't even know you're doing it. And then you use it. So it's very powerful stuff. I'm not advocating professors here, anybody doing anything unethical, but it's science. You should know about the science. Okay, let's talk about the what. What you're looking at here is sort of the starting point. I became a judge in 1999 in the wake of, in Charlotte, North Carolina, of some racially charged incidents. There were a couple of shootings that involved some police officers and some arrests that were or were not, some people thought should have been made, some people thought should not have been made. And at the same time, they have the quality of life surveys that they periodically do about which community is the greatest place to live in the country. They probably have as much validity as those U.S. News and World Report, which is the best law school or college surveys. But they do these surveys all the time. And in the late 90s, they included Charlotte, and Charlotte scored really low on trust between the races and racial tension. And Charlotte is a very nice southern city. It's the New South. We got these gleaming buildings and a football team, and we don't really have. We have a team that plays basketball, but they never win. So I don't know what you want to say about it. But it's the New South. We're past all this. We're forward thinking. We're not Mississippi. What So Charlotte was just shocked and appalled that this survey came up the way that it did. And so I am fortunate that in our court system, we did not have to have the Department of Justice come in and say, you will go through training. I had our chief district court judge, a man by the name of Bill Jones, who's since retired, and our senior resident superior court judge named Shirley Fulton. She's an African-American female. He is a white male. But they were both Both of them are now retired, but they both were forward-thinking enough at the time to say, we need to do something about this. We need our judges to know something about this. And so they partnered with an initiative or a program in Charlotte called the Community Building Initiative. You see there at the top of the slide. You don't have to read all this stuff. There's not going to be a test. And they shut down court for 2 days. And they required that all judges go to this 2-day training. And it was called Judicial Leadership in a Diverse Community. And in that training, we analyzed sort of the historical and legal framework of how things got so disproportionate, how people started to view the court system. Because I didn't tell you one other thing. There was a survey done of the court system itself. And the results of that survey indicated that some thought that certain groups in our community were treated better than other groups in our community when they came before the criminal and civil courts and when they went before the clerks. And as a result of that, we had this 2-day training. We also learned about privilege and power. And also, based on our society's messages that we're given, both in our own families, but in the media and across our community, how we acquire lenses for how we view the world. We each have an individual lens based on how we grew up, but also we have lenses that are given to us by all these stimuli that are bombarding us from the media, from our parents, from our friends, from our experiences, and we go through the world looking at things through these lenses. You heard earlier, you see things the way you want to see them. And that's very important. You will, if, for example, let's say you think that white guys can't dance, okay? And we're dancing, and I can actually dance, okay? What your brain will do is not say, oh, okay, let me challenge that stereotype. You will say, oh, Lou Trosch is an exception to the rule. What an exceptional person he is. If you see an African-American person dancing who you think ahead of time, oh, you don't think anything, oh, that's an exceptional person. You just reinforce, oh, yeah, well, that's what I already knew anyway, and it reinforces your stereotypes. It's called a self-confirming bias. So we confirm our beliefs and we look at the world through these lenses. I didn't really understand privilege and power. I did not know how I went through the world. I didn't realize how I went through the world. My brother and I, as we grew up, had something we called the suit rule. Now, I've got 2 brothers. One is 5'10", and one is 6'5". So I'm talking about my 6'5" brother. He and I, after we got out of college, so we're in our 20s, we realized that when we wore a suit, we could do whatever we wanted. So if I came here to the law school in a suit, the maintenance people would let me into the dean's office. They would let me into any of your professors. I promise you they would, because we used to test it out. We purposely would go to buildings and ask to go places we weren't supposed to go. No, we didn't do anything illegal. We just did it because we thought it was fun. Wow, what can we get away with? We were the original wedding crashers. We weren't smart enough to figure out you could, do what the guys in the movie did. We just went and ate cake, and nobody ever questioned us. And I thought it was because of my sparkling personality, not my good looks, but my sparkling personality. My brother's the good-looking one, so I thought, well, maybe he's good-looking, and I'm really friendly and fun. They just like us. What I realized after I went through this training is no, because people had, it was not for that reason. It was because people had certain expectations about me, and when I wore a suit, my place in the world. And that was a place of authority and a place of entitlement. And I didn't realize any of that until I went through this training. So that's kind of where it started. And I'll show you some numbers. And so we went through this. And by the way, I didn't want to go. I did not want to go to this training. I went kicking and screaming. I was like, ugh. I've dealt with all this. I went to West Charlotte High School. I played basketball. I don't have to go through this. And I thought it was going to be one of those cultural competency type trainings. This is what white people are like. And this is what Hispanic people are like. And this is what Asian Americans are like. And that's what I thought it was going to be like. And I didn't want to sit for 2 days going through that. What I will say is, once I went to that training and realized we were going to talk about how we got there and what was going on inside our minds and how our society got to the place it did, it literally changed my life. And so the numbers, this is a presentation that we did for our school resource officers. We've got a great partnership in Charlotte. Our chief of police has gone through a lot of the trainings that I'm going to talk to you about later, and has required that all of his officers go through a training we call Dismantling Racism, which is a 2-day training to talk about not just implicit bias, but also explicit bias, prejudice, disproportionality, disparities, and what we can do about it. And so anyway, this is a presentation based on 2010 numbers that was done for them, just to show you what things end up looking like in the court system. Now, I'm a juvenile court judge, so I'm talking to you about what I know, but across the board it's the same. Okay, I'm talking to you about juvenile court, but I promise you, I can show you numbers from any courtroom, and the numbers would be similar, especially in our criminal courtrooms. So I could talk to you about abuse and neglect statistics, the mental health system, etc. The numbers are similar. So this is the population of Charlotte. You can see, I don't know if you can read that. It's about Mecklenburg County is about 33% African American, about 59% white, about 4% Asian. These numbers are changing, etc. Now, you notice it doesn't say Hispanic. There's not a place. One of the things that we learned when we started gathering data is everybody kept different data. So this particular data, Hispanics were divided into white Hispanics and black Hispanics. Some people divided into country of origin. Some people have a separate, there's not even the same numbers when you're categorizing things. But for our purposes, the ones that matter are the yellow pie and the red pie, okay? You see right now that the yellow pie is kind of like the Pac-Man, right? It's bigger, okay? That's what you see right now. Now let's look at our systems. So this is a Hispanic and non-Hispanic. So 16% of Mecklenburg County in 2009 was Hispanic. This is the enrollment in our school system. You see it's really balanced. It's pretty balanced. It's about a third, a third, a third. This is the number of students suspended for more than 10 days. Look at the numbers. The red is African American, the white is the gold at the end. This is the number of dropouts. Now look at the Pac-Man. The red is now the Pac-Man. Okay? That's the number of dropouts. 58% of our dropouts are African American students. So that's the school system. We can go to the police department for arrests. You see black arrest in the middle, male green, female red. You can go to the number of complaints received by our juvenile probation office. Huge disparities. Complaints adjudicated. That's the number. That's when they're found guilty. Juvenile court, we like to use different words to pretend like it's really different. So instead of saying pled guilty, you admit. Instead of a trial, you have an adjudication. But that's found guilty or convicted. Now, when you get forward in the system, it gets worse and worse. This is the number of detention admissions. 77% of the kids in Mecklenburg County in 2010 were African American. 86% of that's YDC commitment. That's training school, reform school. I don't know what you want to call it. We call them youth development centers. That's prison basically for kids that are in the juvenile court system. Look at what that Pac-Man looks like now. Okay, so those numbers don't lie. That's called disparity or that's called disproportionality. African Americans make up, in our community, what I say, 39% of the community. They make up 86% of commitments to youth prisons, is the best way I can say it. We dress it up, but that's what it is. That's disproportionality. Whites are also disproportionate, right? They make up 59 or 60% of the population, but only 7% of those commitments. So you can be disproportionate more than your population numbers or lower than your population numbers. So the numbers didn't lie. So I had some takeaway from this knowledge, right? A problem clearly was going on. You can't go to a courtroom, a criminal courtroom, and not see a problem. You can't go to a jail or a detention center and not see that most of the faces you see are brown and black, and mostly male brown or black faces. You can't work in the business that I work in and not see that there's a problem. And I had some nagging issues. And so this is just my definition of disproportionality. So you can read that. I'm not reading it to you. I hate people that do PowerPoints and they're like, disproportionality. So I'm not going to do that. Y'all read, that's disproportionality. We also talk about disparity, so that once you're in that system, for example, if African American juveniles take longer to be released from the Youth Development Center, or they stay in detention for longer periods of time, or they're placed in the foster care system and it takes them longer to get back with their families, those are disparities. But I had some nagging concerns, right? Because I'm like, well, I'm looking around the courtroom. Anybody see that movie Django Unchained? Okay, if you've seen that movie, I'm looking for Leonardo DiCaprio, right? Where's the racist guy? Where's the guy that's a member of the Ku Klux Klan? That's what I'm looking for. And in my courtroom, I can't find that person. The people that I work with, I can't see the person that's saying, I'm going to lock up all the black kids. And I'm going to take black kids away from their families and Hispanic kids away from their families in the child welfare system at higher rates than white kids, because that's just what I believe. In our society, we've been taught, we've really done a good job of dealing with that explicit prejudice that led Martin Luther King, Dr. Martin Luther King, to do what he did. And the Civil Rights Movement had a great success in eliminating, or at least minimizing that explicit. I'm not saying it doesn't exist, because it does, but it's greatly reduced from where it was in the 1950s or the 1960s if you watch that movie in the 1850s. And so you can't find it. And in our society, if you have those beliefs, you are taught from a very early age, don't talk about it. Don't say anything about it, because you don't want to be labeled a racist, or you don't want to be viewed as a sellout, depending on whether you're white, black, male, female, whatever. So just don't talk about it. Maybe if we put our heads in the sand and say that we're colorblind, it'll all just go away. So we're taught that. And so I'm like, okay, I can't find the racist. And certainly I know I'm not a racist, right? I know everybody would say that, right? I'm not. And so I started thinking, well, maybe there are bigger problems, right? Maybe it's in. Now I'll tell you, I tried to make this slide that shows how horrendously technically challenged I am. This friend of mine made this slide. He's let me use it, and somehow in the transfer, I turned what you'll see in a minute is a very smooth circles into these checkerboard images. This is not like a color blindness test. But what this says is, I'm thinking, well, maybe it's bigger issues, right? Maybe it's poverty. Maybe it's that we don't have enough homes. Maybe it's them. Maybe it's individual responsibility. Maybe we don't have access to resources for certain people. But I certainly didn't go here. Or if I did, I was like, well, I went to that 2-day training and I kind of talked about it. Yeah, I dealt with that problem. And so this is kind of going through my mind, and it's a problem. And I stayed in this mode for really a long time. Until one day, I had a case, and this is the case. And I couldn't explain it away. You're okay to leave. I'm just kidding. So I'm in court, and it's a first appearance hearing. And this is 5 years ago. And it was an armed robbery, which is pretty rare in juvenile court where I live. And so normally when someone is charged with an armed robbery, we have to have a first appearance where they come into court, we let them know what they're charged with, and then see whether they should stay in detention or be locked up until we can deal with their case, okay? So we had this hearing, there were 2 co-defendants, and the first co-defendant came in, and I found out, and he came in with the deputies. I have 2 doors. I call one door number 1, that's when you come in with your families, and I call the other door number 2, that's when you come in with the deputies. So he came in with door number 2 with the deputies, and what I found out was that these 2 young men, neither of which had ever been in trouble with the law, both of whom lived in an upper middle class, I don't know, Alexa, did you just have one high school? Do you have like a hoity-toity high school? Well, it was like kids that would end up at W&L. How about that? Okay? So they grew up in a neighborhood like that. Okay? And they went to a nice school, and they both had 2-parent families. And they had not been in trouble before. They were average students, not great students, but they were average students. One participated in sports and one was really active in their church. And anyway, and I get all this background from the court counselor and the people telling me about them. And I find out they watched a movie and they saw somebody rob a bank, and so they figured they're going to go out and rob the McDonald's. And they put on screen masks and they go to the McDonald's with their little pellet guns, but the pellet guns look like pistols. If you've seen a pellet gun now, you know they look like Glocks. They don't look like the old plastic pellet gun. And so they go, they're terrible criminals. They get arrested almost as soon as they're in the parking lot, and so they're charged. And so I hear all this, and I say, well, okay, I understand that. It sounds like, you know, usually armed robbers in our courts stay in jail unless there's some exceptional, or detention unless there's some exception, okay? So I said, all right, I want you to do alternatives to detention investigation, see if this young man should be let out with an ankle monitor or some additional supervision, and we'll come back to court next week and determine whether or not he's appropriate for that. In the hearing, called the co-defendant in, and with that young man, his mom and dad came, his grandparents, his uncles, his aunt, his pastor at church, they all came to the court, which is unusual in my courtroom. Usually I have one person if I'm lucky, and all these people came in, filled up, and talked about what a great guy he was, so they all left. So I called the second case in. A whole other flood of people come in. Now these kids live one street over from each other. They were best friends from the time they were 6-year-olds. Their families were friends. They've known each other forever, lived in the same neighborhood, and they all come in. And the mom, the dad, the grandparents, aunts, uncles, this kid played sports, so his coach came in, and his brother looked like came in, and so the deputy's just standing over here like this. And I wait, and I'm like, what's he doing? He's got to go in the back and get this kid. So I finally said, Mr. Bailiff, are you going to go get the young man? And he said, well, he's not back there, Judge. That's him. And the guy I thought was his brother was, in fact, the co-defendant. So I said, well, come up here, young man. So he comes up to the table. And so I started asking questions like y'all are puzzled. Like, why is the other guy in detention and you're not? Oh, but I didn't ask him until I went to the district attorney. I heard their rendition of the facts. I heard the police rendition of the facts. I heard the court counsels, which are like our probation officers that make recommendations. I heard what they had to say. I went to the defense table, and I heard from everybody. And nobody said a daggone word. And I'm like, wait a minute. Hold on just a second. Why is he not in detention? Was the other guy the gunman? No, Judge, they both had guns. Was it the other guy's idea? No, Judge, they both came up with this together. Did the other guy, no, he didn't have a record, because I remember that from the last hearing. What's the difference? The fact that there was only one difference, and the fact that everybody in this room knows exactly what that difference was, and whether you were here for implicit bias or an MLK day, or I just told you at a party, you would know what that difference was. And you also know which kid was white and which kid was black. Tells you everything you need to know about what my aha moment. Because I looked around and the people in court, look, I trust them. I work with the same people all the time. I knew the people that were in that courtroom were not specifically saying, they were not Leonardo DiCaprio, whatever his character, they weren't like that. But they let it go on and they didn't ask questions because they just assumed, their unconscious mind clicked in. It's just kind of the way it's supposed to be. And I realized, yeah, maybe it's something about individual responsibility or resources or poverty, something bigger than me, or having appropriate homes. But maybe race is part of it. And maybe instead of putting it in a little separate circle that we talk about once a year or 1 month out of the year, maybe we ought to look at it all the time. Maybe I ought to think about it more. And it was like a light bulb lit up over my head. And I don't want to say, it sounds like I'm talking about how bad everybody else in the courtroom was, right? Because that's what we're taught to do in this society. Look for the boogeyman. Look for Leonardo DiCaprio. If you haven't seen the movie, Leonardo DiCaprio plays the evil plantation owner, right? Those of you that have seen him, am I correct? Is that pretty much the evil racist, as horrible as you can get person? That's what we're taught to look for. And if we don't find that, we're cool, we're fine. We're good, we don't see color. And I realized, there's something else going on here. And maybe that other thing is something we ought to be exploring. So, and then I thought back to my own decisions. And I started thinking when I heard cases in court. And I started realizing I was making the same assumptions myself sometimes without even realizing I was doing it because I never thought about it before. But now all of a sudden I'm thinking about it and I'm aware about it and I'm going, oh my God, I do the same thing myself. And it hit me in the face one day, and I had some training, so I thought about it. But if I hadn't, I would have been like everybody else in that courtroom and not even questioned it. And that's how we walk through the world. That's how y'all walk through the world. And we pretend that we don't, but we do. And we walk through the world that way, whether we're black, whether we're white, whether we're Asian, whether we're Hispanic, whether we're men, whether we're women, whether we're tall, whether we're short, old or young. We walk through life with those views. So I said, I got to learn something more about it. Well, fortunately, at that time, other organizations were looking into this same issue because judges across the country, at least in juvenile court, and one of the things I'll tell you all, if you want to know what the most progressive courts are, they're the juvenile courts. They're not the criminal courts. They certainly are not commercial litigation. Juvenile courts are progressive. I don't know if it's because of the nature of the courts and who they work with, but the National Council of Juvenile and Family Court Judges and Casey Family Programs came together because judges were tired of these disproportionalities and disparities and said, we want to quit talking about it, we want to do something about it. And they began an initiative called Courts Catalyzing Change. And Courts Catalyzing Change has a national agenda. I'm not going to go through the whole thing, but one of the parts of it is they talk about implicit bias, to do something to reduce disproportionality and disparity. The National Center for State Courts also had a similar initiative about how implicit bias affects all courts, not just juvenile courts. And I was fortunate enough to work with them, both the Courts Catalyzing Change and the National State Courts Implicit Bias Initiative, in visiting other courts and learning more about this thing we're calling implicit bias. And it was so instructive, and some other judges in our community agreed to talk about it, and we got Community Building Initiative to come back and have another 6-month training for all of our juvenile court judges and our stakeholders. So that's the District Attorney's Office, the juvenile defense attorneys, the social workers, the social work attorneys, the guardian ad litem, that's the volunteers for the kids, and other advocates. We came together and we went through a 6-month training. And after that, we said, we've got to do something about this permanently because you can't just do it once. And so we started an initiative. Well, if you want more information about Courts Catalyzing Change, there's the information. Go look at it. You can get the research that they've done about the effectiveness of that program. You can get just the general information about what the agenda is and what's going on with that initiative. But locally, we came up with Race Matters for Juvenile Justice because we wanted to expand Courts Catalyzing Change beyond child welfare to also include delinquency. Here's the website. I would encourage you to go on that website. And so we now conduct regularly. This year we're going to have 14 trainings in Charlotte with stakeholders, so all our school resource officers, all our principals, all of our regular police officers, our social workers, and the management levels from those organizations, and others, advocates, our district attorney just went through a training, are all going through this 2-day training, and then we're developing an ongoing steering group because one of the things I'll tell you is you can't go to one speech. You can't go to one 2-day training and say, oh, okay, I'm cured. They waved the magic wand over me. They did the holy water on me. I'm good. It's something you have to fight for the rest of your life because your brain is really powerful. And your brain will revert to those shortcuts the second that you turn your head, the second that you're stressed out, the second that you don't have enough time. Like my brain's getting ready to do it right now because I'm looking at the clock and I'm like, I can't keep these people forever. So I'm going to start using shortcuts myself. That's what your brain does. And so I realized that implicit bias was a key to understanding all of this. In addition, because as lawyers, we typically look at the legal framework, the historical framework, the social framework, and that's pretty typical, and that's very important. But what lawyers often don't do is go beyond and look at the psychological impact. And in fact, the way that implicit bias got hooked up with courts catalyzing change, we were in a meeting, a national steering committee meeting. So these are enlightened judges from across the country who have devoted their careers to reducing disproportionalities and dealing with this issue. And we were arguing, and it was getting testy, and people were shutting down. And finally, because to acknowledge that you have a bias is hard. Y'all wouldn't even acknowledge anybody had. There was, oh, what negative stereotypes about black people? What? Why, we've never heard such a thing. You won't admit it in here. Well, think about judges. Our whole lives are dedicated that we are neutral fact finders. We're referees. We have no biases. So it was ugly in that room. And a psychologist finally stood up, because I don't think psychologists do a very good job sometimes of sharing the information that they have. Not Julie, but other psychologists. They share with each other, but not with other fields sometimes. Maybe we don't ask sometimes. But anyway, the psychologist, his name's Sean Marsh, he stood up and said, well, you know, there's this thing called implicit bias. Huh? Huh? Well, what is it? So he told us about it. And everybody went, oh, so you mean that I have these biases not because I'm a racist human being, but because I'm a human being? Oh. Well, now we can talk about it and get somewhere. And so we came up with a study called the bench card study. And one of the things that I will say about how implicit bias and these shortcuts impact you is, this is complicated, but let me just make it simple. The blue is called resource guidelines discussions. Those are best practices in juvenile court. That's what judges should be talking about. They should ask people these questions like, how is the family's place of living? Are there relatives that could care for this child? What services could we offer the parents? Those kinds of questions. Okay, those are best practices. CCC discussion is issues of disparity, disproportionality, bias. And parental engagement is how much did the court actually acknowledge that the parent existed, because a lot of times in court the litigants aren't even noticed. Okay? The judges they went to Portland, Oregon, Omaha, Nebraska, and Los Angeles, California when they did the study. And the judges who were participating in the study were all part of a model court program. So they had all been trained in best practice, in these resource guidelines, and questions you're supposed to ask. They knew about courts catalyzing change. So these are the best judges there are in the country. And the judges said when they saw this bench card, when they saw this, they said, and there were a bunch of questions listed on it. They said, oh, I already asked all this stuff. This will be a piece of cake. I already do all this. And they thought they already did all of it. Okay? What you'll see is, and so they had a control group, right? One group of judges just kept doing what they were doing. They thought they were asking anyway, so it'd probably be the same. And another group of judges read those questions verbatim. Look at the difference. In each jurisdiction, judges thought they were doing one thing, and they actually were doing something else. Why? Because of time pressures, because of assumptions, because of mental shortcuts, because of bias, and because of stress. And so they made assumptions and they didn't get all the information, though they thought they were getting all the information. So, implicit bias impacts everything that you do. I'll give you one more quick example. That gentleman, his sentence has been commuted from a death sentence to a life sentence based on a law in North Carolina. Now, I don't know what's going to happen with it because the legislature did their trick on it and it's going to go back to the courts. But anyway, there was a law in North Carolina called the Racial Justice Act that was passed, and it allowed the defense to present evidence of a pattern of bias, not just individual. How much do they know about? They don't know anything about Batson, probably. Instead of individual challenges about this particular case, they could use more comprehensive evidence. It opened the floodgates for defense lawyers. I was asked to testify at this trial about some of the things I'm talking to you about, what you can do about implicit bias in the court system. But before I testified, I got to watch a professor from Tufts who had done interesting studies, because the big challenge in this case was jury selection, that the DAs got rid of black jurors and kept white jurors. And that was sort of their what they did. And they used statistics and all this stuff. And he explained why. And it was because of implicit biases. So here's the study. They gave people, they did college students, they did law students, and they did lawyers. They gave them 2 sheets of paper. And they said, here's a juror information sheet. Because jurors, when they come in, they fill out information, your name, where you went to school, that kind of stuff. Here they are. And you've got to pick juror A or juror B based on this one-page sheet. And it told about them. Both of them were fairly nondescript. They were very carefully worded. They were tested the way psychologists test things. And they both had one thing that you could possibly strike a juror for. This juror A didn't go very far in school. Juror B had had a run-in with the law a long time ago. They paired with these 2 biographies, these 2 juror information sheets, pictures. And the pictures were also very carefully done from the shoulders up. Both men had the same very short haircut, both the same expression on their face with whatever numbers that were the correct numbers to kind of look pleasant. They both had a white shirt on and a tie. Okay? One was black, one was white. When they showed the potential lawyers, college students, lawyers, well, it didn't matter, the pictures, and the black gentleman was juror A and the white gentleman was juror B, the prospective lawyers were 67% picked the white juror. And then they went back and they asked them, why'd you pick juror A? And they said, well, juror B had a run-in with the law. Okay? And then, of course, they went back and switched the pictures, right? And now, suddenly, everybody, 67% of people picked juror B. Well, why did you do that? They didn't say, oh, it's because he's a black guy. They said, oh, because he didn't go very far in school. Okay? They didn't know that they had an issue with bias. In fact, what was going on was beneath the conscious, right? So they just immediately were looking at it like, oh, I'm going to pick this guy. When they were asked to explain it, they came up, then they engaged the frontal lobe, or whatever it is, your conscious, I don't know I'm saying this all wrong, but they engaged the part of your brain that does the critical thinking, and they came up with a rational explanation. That's how our mind works. And so it affects everything that you do. So now, okay, that's nice. Thanks for telling us all that. What am I supposed to do? Because the DAs are like, well, okay, well, I guess the way we think is what are we supposed to do? Case closed, it's over. So then I testified about what I'm going to tell you about now. And that is that you have to do something about it. The first thing is, in order to mitigate these biases that are present in every single one of your brains, you have to be aware of the problem. And you have to go through some training that is intentional and intensive. This isn't enough. Listen to the 2 of us talk, maybe entertaining, maybe it's boring, I don't know. But it's not enough. It's enough for you to be aware to now take the second step on your own, or as a law school, or as a community, to figure out what's going on a more deeper level. It also must be across all systems in the court system. What we find is a lot of times the people at the top, you see them singing Kumbaya up there, they're trained, they know what's going on. And then they come up with a bench card or a tool and they hand it down to the people without any explanation or training, the people that are doing the work, below the clouds freezing, and say, here, do this. And they don't know what they're doing. And they're like, oh, okay, great, one more piece of paper. I got to fill out the 500 in triplicate. And so you got to train everybody. So training is key. We call it workforce development. But you can use specific tools. And this bench card, for example, one of the things that it does is, one of the things that they've shown is if you use a checklist, it helps prevent you from taking shortcuts, right? You get all the information. It makes you get information that sometimes you think you're getting when you're not getting it. It feels like a robot asking these. I hate asking these questions because I'm like reading the same ones every day, all day. But it makes me get all the information. And once I do it, It helps me make decisions based on the evidence, not on my assumptions. So checklists are good. And the other thing that it does is you check yourself at the door. Every time there's a purple shaded piece on this bench card that I use before my child welfare hearings, and I ask myself a series of questions such as, what assumptions have I made about the cultural identity, gender, and background of this family? How is my decision specific to this child and this family? What evidence has supported every conclusion that I have drawn and challenged, I'm getting old, so unsupported assumptions? So I have to ask them, and I get sick of asking myself this, but it puts me in the right for, oh, that's right, Lou. You have assumptions that you're going to make. Check yourself at the door. And so that's something that can be helpful to come up with a tool to make yourself aware of this. So I think the simple answer is for DAs to have some sort of checklist when they do jury selection, or to let judges do the jury selection like they do in federal court, and let them use a checklist so you get all the information, not asking only the black jurors certain questions. They showed that as well. And white jurors, a whole different set of questions, which is what happens. Because all they have to do now is the district attorneys have to come up with some legitimate reason, right? So they ask all the questions to the people they want to get off the jury, all these ways that they can come up with, and you could explain this better than I could, how it works in the court system. Isn't that how it happens? So that there are ways that you can deal with it. Another thing that we came up with was, this is a court observation form. I can say this because I'm a judge. Judges don't listen to anybody. They're arrogant as hell. Okay? They think they never do anything wrong. In fact, we were in this training for a whole year, and finally 9 months into it, the judges just talk, and everybody else. And these are the heads of agencies. These are powerful people. Sat there quietly and would agree with the judges or defer to the judges. And finally, the facilitator said, why are you guys not talking? Somebody had the courage to say, well, the judges talk all the time, and we're scared to say what we want to say. And that was a big breakthrough. And so one of the things that we agreed to do was to go observe one another, because when you're held accountable, people do a better job. When they know they're being held accountable, they do a better job. So I go and watch my colleagues in court on a periodic sort of scheduled basis. I use this as sort of just a form to do it. We don't keep the records because some judges are really worried about that because we have an elected system and they don't want it to be public. But we use this as sort of a guide and have informal conversations about when issues, not just of race and ethnicity come up, but cultural competency, as well as other best practices. And it's been a really valuable tool. So when you hold people accountable, then, like for example, you guys should hold the law school accountable to do something about this. Somebody should hold the undergraduate school at Washington and Lee University, Robert E. Lee, that's the Lee, to close classes on Martin Luther King Day. When you're held accountable, you do a better job. And I don't mean to despair. I love W&L. I went to W&L. I'm a proud graduate of W&L. I got those ball caps, and I had this old tattered alumni basketball jersey when I blocked Professor Casey's shot and put Spalding on his forehead. I think I still have that jersey. It's torn up. My wife keeps trying to throw it out. I keep going to rescue it. So I love W&L. But people, when they're held accountable, do a better job. Another thing that we do is we found that when you're under stress and when you're under time constraints, you revert to shortcuts more and more and more because your brain's trying to save time and get things done. And so we now schedule complex hearings or difficult hearings early in the morning when we're fresh. And we also structure our dockets now where we leave a specific amount of time for each case. So some cases we'll schedule them and they're 15 minutes long. Others will leave 2 hours for them. A lot of courts schedule what they call cattle call dockets. Everybody's scheduled at 9 in the morning. And what happens is you get to 11:30 and everybody's like, oh my God, we got 7 cases left. You just rush through real fast, and of course you make all kinds of assumptions. The last thing that I'll say is that judicial leadership has been key. Your leaders have to buy into doing something about this, and if they don't, it's much more difficult. I'm fortunate that where I live, the judges in our juvenile court and our overall court system have bought into this and realized how important it is to talk about these issues and then try and do something about it. Last example to show you when you have that leadership and you use these different tools, you can reach different results. I'm going to give you an example from my community. There is a federal law that it's not that important, but it's called, it is important, but for your purposes, it's called the Indian Child Welfare Act, or ICWA. ICWA requires in abuse and neglect cases certain specific rules and procedures be in place if a child is the member or eligible for membership in a federally recognized Indian tribe. Okay? Around here, that would be the Eastern Band of the Cherokees, at least in North Carolina. There are a number of tribes in North Carolina, but that's the only federally recognized tribe. Most members of that tribe are up in the mountains of North Carolina. I was told for 15 years, well, it wouldn't really apply to us. We don't really have any Native American kids that applies to in Charlotte. We're required by federal law and state law to ask about it. Everybody checked the box off that they asked about it, but nobody really asked about it until I started using this bench card. Within 6, and I've been on the bench 14 years, and I was a lawyer for 8 years before that, many of them in juvenile court. So that's, however long it's been, 20 years. In the 6 months that I started asking that question, we investigated and found more Native American kids that law applied to than we had in the 15 years before that. Because I asked the question. Judges usually say, well, what am I supposed to do about it? I can't do anything about it. I can't control social workers. Lawyers say, well, they just, hey, whatever walks into my door. The reality is, if you change your practice, people before you will change their practice. You wouldn't be sitting here today if David and some others probably with him decided this is important and we need to do something about this. And he's not a professor, he's not a dean, he's not a chancellor, he's a student that thought this was an important issue. So I would say to you all, individually, in your own lives, you have a responsibility, especially if you're going to be lawyers, to know about this stuff. You can profit by it too, by the way. I told you that earlier. Knowing about these heuristics. But you have a responsibility to know what you're going to do in your line of work and how it impacts other people. And as a community, we all have a responsibility to know something more about it than we're taught, than is explained to us in school, than we're shown in the media, or our friends and family tell us. And so my hope is that today will be a spark for you, or a light bulb may go off, at least for some of you all, that, hey, I got to check kind of how I'm looking at the world. And maybe there's something that I've always assumed that's not exactly right. So, I'm done. And I went way longer than I was supposed to. She was supposed to give me the cut it sound. So, I don't know if you all have any questions or not, but it's late. I know you all can go if you want. Anybody have any questions? For Julie or I? She's more interesting than me. She could do all kind of cool games like that that you play. No questions? Yes?
I had a question about age, and I don't know, you may both be able to respond to this. I just gotta believe that the implicit stereotyping that we do in response to a shark's teeth originates earlier in life than these other types of implicit responses. And I wonder if that's been studied, and similarly, I wonder if you have any experience with the statistics on stereotyping when as I think they do in some drug cases where the courts are youth courts, and actually for juvenile offenders, the adjudicators are younger people. And I wonder if the bias replicates itself in the same way in that setting as it does. So that's kind of an age-related question.
Okay, so yes, we do. We develop those categories, the danger categories, early. But kids, pretty early. What do you think the first social category they begin to categorize by is? What would you guess? Like race, gender. Gender. Okay, so gender, because it's simpler, and around by 3, kids can categorize people pretty easily. Male and female, there's only 2 categories. They usually have both of those types of people in their life. But by age 5, kids are pretty good at categorizing according to race. And the stereotyping stuff happens later. And first kids stereotype just based on physical attributes, and then more on the things that we kind of care about. So yeah, it's a developmental thing. But kids get it earlier than you'd be surprised at how early they get it.
Yeah, if you want to look up the doll test, Google the doll test. Anybody heard? You've heard of the doll? Tell them about the doll test.
Basically, you have kids and they have a white doll and a black doll, and someone asks them, okay, which one's the good one? And they'll hold up the white doll, and that's for black children and white children alike. It doesn't really matter.
And they're very young. They're like 3rd grade, 2nd grade.
Younger than that.
Yeah, they've done all the way to kindergartners, and I think they've done some studies with infants, and they're already able to recognize people that are by fate. They're starting to recognize face because a lot of this is survival, right? It's evolutionary. You need to know who's with me and who's against me, and so that I don't know what it all has to do with each other, but there is a positive side to thinking this way. That's how we survived as a species. But there's a very negative flip side of it, and that's what we're talking about today. But so yeah, it affects youth like teen court. We have a teen court in Mecklenburg County. Same situation. People they don't know that it's affecting them, but it does. Any other questions? Y'all ready to get out of here, right? Thank y'all very much.